Welcome to Retroality TV presents Reimagine That with Chris Mann, offering refreshing reality with a retro twist. Our special guest this week is DIY's latest home renovator, actor Bronson Pinchot, and we'll explore the meaning of houses and dreams with our very own dream interpreter, Yvonne Reba. And now, introducing your host, Chris Mann.
Thank you once again, Linda Kay, our vintage-voiced announcer and producer. And hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 6 of Retroality.tv's Reimagine That, the podcast where retro pop meets forward thought. And this week we have a special show with a special theme of the house. And really, deconstructing and reconstructing your house. Our special guest this week is somebody that I have long been a fan of. First, we knew him as Balki Bartokomous on the ABC hit Perfect Strangers that ran from the mid-'80s to the early '90s. And then he went on to big-time success. Well, actually, he had big-time success in features. And he went on to have even more of it in features and in TV movies. And he's back with a brand new show that premieres this weekend on the DIY network, aptly titled The Bronson Pinchot Project. We're so thrilled to have Bronson on the show. I want to say thank you to two very special people who helped us make this Bronson Pinchot interview a reality. It has long been my dream to interview Bronson, actually, so there's the dreams and reality thing again. And I have two special people to thank. My longtime friend and co-producer of this podcast, Linda Kay, who for years, since the late 80s, has run the Perfect Strangers fan club, P.S. I Love You, and that began as a newsletter back in the day. It has evolved in recent years into her astounding Perfect Strangers website, the Perfect Strangers website, perfectstrangers.tv. And also want to thank Lucy, who runs Bronson Pinchot Online. That's bronsonpinchot.org. Lucy and Linda Kay, you rock. And Bronson Pinchot, you rock. And in addition to talking about his new show, which is all about restoring and rebuilding houses and buildings, really reimagining living spaces, he also talks a bit about his really dramatic, amazing dream and sort of the disturbing things that happened within that dream that in a way echoed aspects of his childhood. He talked about that dream a year or so ago on Celebrity Nightmares Decoded. So he'll give us a bit more insight into that and a lot of insight into his childhood as well as his burgeoning career in many different directions since. He is such a funny guy and we're so thrilled to have him here. Stick around because then our own dream interpreter, Yvonne Reba, will talk about some of her own house dreams and how those really are symbolic for your own life. Your own house and your dream is your own life. And Yvonne will share how she used these dreams to help inspire her to rebuild her own life and how you could do that too by paying attention to those subconscious, weird, symbolic little movies that run through your own mind while you're asleep at night. But Bronson Pinchot has been living out his dream, and we have lived it with him. Just as we have the guest on our show next week, that will actually be the first of 2 parts with Little House on the Prairie star, Alison Angrim. She has written a best-selling book, I'm sure you've heard of it, Confessions of a Prairie Bitch. Best title ever. And she, like Bronson, is very funny and really opens her heart, just like Bronson does, and gets into what her life has been like, surviving childhood sexual abuse and being a voice and someone who has empowered not only herself, but others in fighting and standing up politically and socially for justice in the fight against childhood predators and abusers. So please stick around next week for the first of 2 parts with Nasty Nelly. Alison also, quite hilariously, gives us the latest on her ongoing rift with co-star Melissa Sue Anderson and Alison's attempts about a year ago for a reconciliation with with TV's Mary Ingalls that really didn't go off that well. We have seen a very successful and surprising, shocking really, reconciliation with two of our favorite TV stars from the 70s and 80s, Joyce DeWitt and Suzanne Somers, who last Thursday reunited in Suzanne's new YouTube talk show, Suzanne Somers Breaking Through. They had not seen each other for 31 years, and they saw each other for the first time on Suzanne's new talk show. So if you haven't seen it yet, check it out at youtube.com/Cafe Mom Studios. I just published a blog post all about this historic reconciliation on my retroality.tv website, so give it a look. I analyze the reunion, what we saw and what we didn't see, based in part upon the backstory that I know like nobody else does as the author of the Three's Company book, Come and Knock on Our Door, and someone who has been involved with the show for many, many years, the behind-the-scenes projects that have been done on it, etc. So I try to offer those insights, and really I think that this reconciliation, we haven't seen the last of it. I propose to Oprah Winfrey, the god of all TV stars, that she consider looking into this story even deeper. Wouldn't we all love to see a Suzanne and Joyce reconciliation part 2 on the OWN network for Three's Company's 35th anniversary? I think we do. So check that out. One interesting aspect of the whole Joyce and Suzanne reunion, Suzanne brings up her childhood. She, of course, we all know, grew up the child of an alcoholic who was abusive, who was at times violent, certainly emotionally abusive. So I think we need to look at our celebrities with a sympathetic, certainly an empathetic eye, and understand that they're human just like the rest of us. They all have backstories that in many cases, certainly in the case of Suzanne Somers, and I think you will find in the case of Bronson Pinchot, who had a very challenging childhood. His father abandoned him when he was just 2 years old. But celebrities, stars, artists, actors, they are usually very driven people, and in these cases have been inspired and driven by adversity to succeed and reach career heights and personal heights, and Suzanne has done that. But one thing Suzanne doesn't seem to have come full circle with in terms of understanding are the Three's Company years, are those the TV family that she had on Three's Company with John Ritter and Joyce DeWitt, who really, they were like siblings. And Three's Company, for all the things that it was criticized for being, titillating, TNA, silly, stupid, mindless, whatever, at its heart, it was a domestic comedy. It was a buddy comedy, just like Perfect Strangers. And those characters, those actors, had a house, figuratively and literally. They lived with each other on screen, but they also lived with each other for 8, 9 seasons in some cases on set. That set was like a second home to them. And in the case of Suzanne and Three's Company, the early years were great. Then it got challenging. Then it got very difficult, and it ended up being very humiliating, tough, hurtful, painful exit for Suzanne, but it also was very, very hurtful to John Ritter and Joyce DeWitt and Suzanne's other colleagues. Every conceivable media outlet has covered this Suzanne-Joyce reunion. Suzanne has been on The Talk, Access Hollywood, talking about the ick between her and Joyce, and I've noticed people on YouTube and under stories that have been posted on usatoday.com, etc. Why 31 years? Why did it take them so long? What's this ick they're speaking of? Why did Suzanne say it wasn't her idea to have Joyce on the show? Why hasn't Joyce reached out? I try to answer all of those questions in a meaningful way. And in my blog, as with my book, in this podcast, my whole goal is to give a voice to both sides and come from things as a fan and as a journalist, try to combine those two things in a meaningful way so that people can get some new insights into these stories about our beloved TV childhood heroes. So check out retroality.tv. and let me know what you think about that blog. And despite all of this rather somber, sobering discussion of abusive childhoods and reconciliations that worked and haven't worked and will they work, let's get some comic relief here, because that is why we watched Three's Company, and that is why we watched Perfect Strangers, and in particular, Bronson Pinchot. That is one damn funny man, not only as Balki, but as Bronson himself. He is truly a character, and without too much further ado, let me just say that he is hysterical. The man gave us an interview, in part, from his bathroom. It is his first, as he calls it, internude. And now, let's join Bronson Pinchot, who rocks it in every room of his house. Hi, Bronson. How are you?
I'm fantastic, Chris. And yourself?
I'm doing great. Thank you. And thank you so much for stopping by my Reimagine That podcast. I've long followed your work and am thrilled to have you here as our guest to talk about your new DIY show and some other fun, interesting stuff.
Just try to shut me up.
We want you to talk.
The pro and con of interviewing me, the pro is, I have a lot to say. The con is just try to make me stop. It's always been a challenge.
I love it.
Challenge.
I love it. I mean, I have to say, you have the best fan websites. You have quite a following, and people are thrilled that you're back. And, speaking of reimagining, you're bringing that concept home in your new show, the Bronson Pinchot Project. What prompted this idea to sort of share your talents at restoring houses and other buildings?
Well, like all the best things that ever happened to me, including Perfect Strangers, I was minding my own business, and somebody else came up with it. I had nothing to do with it.
Wow.
And
really?
it was when Perfect Strangers was conceived, I was having a vacation in Greece, and I was listening to people's accents and looking at the way they moved and what they were like and how they talked, but I wasn't thinking of it. And the producers of Perfect Strangers called me up and said, "We want to do a show where you play an endearing little foreigner." And I said, "Oh, I don't do endearing. I don't do endearing. I'm terrifically sophisticated, and I don't do endearing or exuberant." And they said, "Well, we disagree." And I said, "Okay, I'll try it." And the identical thing happened with this. I started restoring one 1830s Greek revival house in this little tiny town, and I taught myself to be good at it. I wasn't, I don't know what I was at the beginning, but I taught myself to be good. And then I bought another house across the street, and then I bought the house next to that, and I bought a few houses, and then I started to become absolutely consumed with it, and I learned how to, when I fix old houses, I use parts of other old houses so that when I step back, it looks like I've never done anything, which is a great trick in itself. So hold on, I'm taking a sip of tea. Delicious Earl Grey. Hold on.
Certainly.
So I got so involved in it, I wasn't really paying attention to much of anything. And just like the first time around, I got a call from Matt Levine from Departure Films in New York. And he said, "We understand you've gone strangely overboard with this little group of houses. Can I come up and discuss doing a show with you?" I said, "Sure, come on up." He sounded like a nice guy. So he came up and he shot for 45 minutes. There was a snowstorm and he had to leave.
Oh, my gosh.
And when he got to New York, he edited it together, and DIY apparently bought it on site.
Wow.
They literally just looked at it and said, we want it.
Fantastic.
And then all of a sudden we had a deal, and we shot a pilot, and then they ordered the series. And this is my new phrase as of today. Somebody said to me, "Well, it seems that you've reinvented yourself."
Yes.
And I said, "No, I de-invented myself, because I did my first little house when I was 8 years old. There was a caretaker's hut back of the house that I grew up in, because it used to be a nursery, and there was a little caretaker's hut in back, which I grew up in the 60s, and this thing had been built around World War I, and it was falling down, but I fixed it up when I was 8.
Yeah.
And I got stuff from the Salvation Army, and it was a neat little, and everybody used to call it Bronson's little house. And
cool.
I did houses from the time I was 8 and loved them, and I just kept doing it. So when this journalist said today, "Oh, it's so fascinating that you've reinvented yourself," I said, no. I de-invented myself. When I first became, noticed in the media with the various projects in the 80s, I didn't know who to be. And I kind of was overexcited and was largely, I think, as many actors are at the beginnings of their career, confused with the characters I was playing. So people thought I was sort of footloose and slap happy, and maybe I was so excited I came across that way. But I had always been very, very serious about art and architecture and conservation and all kinds of things, and it never ever got any. It never came up. Everybody was much more interested in. I don't know, to tell you the truth, I don't know if I really was a loose cannon or if I got a kick out of playing into the expectation that I would be, but somehow it was chicken or the egg. So I became the expert of the non sequitur, and I did all these loony interviews from which one gains absolutely zero idea of who I am. And my assistant at the time was a very intelligent and insightful woman named Johanna, and she used to say every time I finished an interview, "They have no idea who you are, Bronson. No idea at all. I'm very disappointed." She used to say that, that I came across as a lunatic and that they didn't know how. And I didn't know what she was talking about, but I do know now because it's quite satisfying to just, the cameras show up in the morning and they're here for 12 or 14 hours and they just get what they get. I don't try anything. And fortunately, my producer was visionary enough at the beginning to say, look, just who you are and what you do is watchable. And so we're not going to try to be funny and we're not going to try to be dramatic and we're not going to try and do anything. Just get on with what you do. And that was the great watchword of the whole thing. So I just get on with it. And so I've de-invented myself. But I just do what I do. I'm so in love with it that I hope that comes across. I'm told it does.
Yes, it does. It does. I saw the first episode that they previewed recently. The big premiere is this weekend, right? February
the Saturday night at 10:30 p.m.
Great. It's exciting, and you definitely seem in your element there in that old antique home in Hartford. What other, you mentioned the Greek influence, and I want to talk to you a bit more about Balki and Perfect Strangers, but what architectural and artistic styles, influences will we see in this show and that maybe led you to Hartford?
Oh, hold on 1 second. My director is downstairs actually trying to film something.
Okay.
Andrew! Just hold it down a little bit. Because there's no walls in this house. The whole thing's open like a loft. But my revered and beloved director is down there yapping up a storm. Are you all right down there? All right, you good? You shoot away. This is what happens when you have a reality TV in your home. Actually, it's like having roommates, but he's a dear friend. Anyway, they're building a fire in there. Not with the furniture, right in the fireplace. The influences in the houses that I'm working on, they're all from the early 19th century. At that time, the style of the White House, which is now called Greek Revival, was so common that it was merely referred to as the national style. They didn't even call it Greek Revival.
Right.
All through this country, up and down, north and south, everything from farmhouses to little country lawyers' offices were done with Greek columns and various things. And after the Civil War, much of the North had enough money to rebuild in the Victorian style, and then rebuild after that in the arts and crafts style, and rebuild after that in the Beaux-Arts style, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Actually, those two were reversed. Beaux-Arts first, but they didn't do that in the South because they didn't have the money. So the misconception nowadays is that the Greek Revival style is essentially a Southern phenomenon, but that's not at all the case.
Right.
It's like saying, why do women in Los Angeles not seem to get old and women in Dayton do? Well, duh, because women in Los Angeles have facelifts. There's always a reason. So it was once called the national style, and it's something that has always appealed to me for reasons that run so deep. I can give absolutely no reason other than saying, why do you sometimes taste a food you've never had and it becomes your new favorite, or see a movie about a subject you never knew anything about and it consumes you. I just became consumed with the Greek Revival style. All the houses that I purchased in this little town are all from that era. So I'm able to, when people demolish homes from that period and I'm able to acquire the pieces, they fit interchangeably almost.
Yeah.
So that you can take a farmhouse from upstate Connecticut and use the floors and the moldings in one of the houses here in northeastern Pennsylvania, and they fit. They fit as if they were made for them.
How cool. Well, the possibilities are endless there for your show. How have the people of Hartford reacted to you doing a reality show in their little town?
Well, first of all, it's our little town, and also there's no T in Hartford. It's just Hartford. There's no T in it.
Oh, okay.
It was named for Hartford, Connecticut, but they had a town meeting meeting in, I believe, 1810, and the minutes are preserved to the extent that it is known that somebody stood up and said, if we don't say the T, why should we print it? So they changed it to Harvard, and it's part of the mindset of upstate northeastern Pennsylvania to, well, they largely don't bring it up. The town is as big as your toe. It's tiny. And we're always out with our cameras, and we're doing photo sessions right in the middle of Main Street and everything else. And I have yet to have one person say to me, what are you doing? If I bring it up in conversation, if I bring it up at the diner and say, my friend Debbie runs the diner, and we're always ordering food, and she gets to know the names of the different carpenters and things. And she lives on the hill above one of the houses, so she can see what we're doing. And she says, oh, God, it looks so pretty. But, tell me all about it. But that's because she knows me and because she can see the house.
Yeah.
The rest of the time, nobody ever says it's just a cultural thing. I mean, if we were in L.A. or New York, somebody would say, hey, what are you shooting? I heard you got a new, gig going. But nobody says a word, which is quite endearing. It's just nobody says anything, which kind of gives me, it tickles my funny bone because it's like, well, duh, Dev, we're like right in the, but we don't bring it up. I have a feeling that when they see how very, very affectionately Pennsylvania, and in particular this town, is portrayed in the show, they're going to be very proud.
Yeah.
I would think that it's possible that without seeing the show, they might think, well, what is he going to do? Make fun of the fact that it's in the boonies and, and he's this New York sophisticate or whatever. But in fact, our decision from the very beginning was to show it through my incredibly grateful eyes and how pastoral and beautiful and just a very loving view. And I think they'll be proud. I think they'll be proud to see the affection I have for it. And, you could imagine how someone would think, oh, well, it's just going to be snide and it's going to be kind of Green Acres. But in fact, everything that I feel about it is, we also have our director and our associate producer are both very, very visual, and they're both on camera. Mm-hmm. So you see a lot of the lyrical quality of the show comes from their appreciation of the beauty of it and the sweetness of it. And it's got a lot of, it really wears its heart on its sleeve, and I'm most proud of that, because it would be very easy to be snide.
Yes.
And say, where's the Starbucks and where's the, but there isn't any. It's a dry township as well. There's no bars or anything. And it's a very innocent and sweet place. And it's a love letter to the town, really.
Oh, that's wonderful. And, you clearly have a deep appreciation for history and preserving history. So the little, and I don't even know if you want to go there, but that little gazebo thing that happened a couple of years ago, is that a thing in the past, the controversy with something that was on your land? I know that was a while ago. It sounds like things are going fine now.
They're just fine. And, as I always say, I said to one of the town supervisors once, I said, I have to apologize. I haven't created any controversy in a while. I mean, in a town this size, very tiny little town. And so if you even, just sort of blow your nose, everybody notices. But after I had been here for a good number of years, people realized, oh, he really does live here, and he's really part of, he lives here. He's not, I don't know what they thought at the beginning. Maybe it was some kind of vacation home, or I was going to bring in a lot of loony showbiz types, but in fact, it's the opposite. I don't have any showbiz here. As a matter of fact, I will often say to people, if they start asking questions about showbiz, I say, at New Jersey is the last place on the map that I will agree to talk about showbiz. Once I cross the border into Pennsylvania, I'd rather not. It's not my favorite topic. It feels like, as a topic, it's never been my favorite topic. I don't understand what there is to talk about.
Yeah.
The work is the work. I mean, you could do a performance and it might move people or touch them or make them laugh, and that's all there is to it. I don't know what there is to talk about beyond that. I don't really care who's married to whom, who broke up, who adopted a child. I don't want to know anything. If somebody does a performance that moves me, I'm grateful. And if they don't, I'm perfectly happy to leave them alone. But I don't understand what there is to talk about. I really don't.
Right.
If you notice, if you read articles that cater to this appetite for showbiz, they're not really even talking about, they're all on the periphery. who got a tattoo, whose ass is fat, whose ass isn't. Who cares? I don't care.
It's so true.
I honestly don't care.
It's very shallow, and it's like there's no soul to it.
I don't know what they're talking about. It's really funny, but there isn't. You do a movie, and you cut all the boring parts out, you hope, and then you put it together, and that's all there is to say. I remember saying to somebody once, I don't know what the question was, but I said, everything I have to say about that topic is in my performance. There isn't anything else. If there was anything worth saying, I'd have put it in.
Wow.
And that was from the heart, but it wasn't understood. It's just, if you do a documentary, let's say, we do a documentary, you and I do a documentary about the Revolutionary War. If we love the topic, we put in absolutely everything that... I gave a speech once that we had a project at the New York Shakespeare Festival. We were doing Henry V, and the director said, everybody has to do a little research project and talk about some aspect of life in the late 16th century. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And he had to make a speech. And he asked me to research how the English saw the French in about, in the 1595. And it was very hard to find because in the 1590s there was a lot of... Queen Elizabeth I was being courted by a Frenchman, so it wasn't acceptable to say anything rude about the French. It wasn't acceptable at all. It was a very dangerous thing to do. It was very hard to find. And I started the speech by saying, I'm going to tell you every last scrap of information that I found. Do not ask me any questions because everything I learned, I'm going to tell you. But there will be no question and answer because I think everything I'm telling you is everything I found. And that's the way I feel sometimes. There isn't anything else to say about showbiz. What's it going to say? What are you talking about?
Yeah, and usually the focus is very shallow. And what's ironic, you've had this long and versatile career as an actor, and I want to talk to you in a bit about some of your darker and layered roles. But, of course, in TV, you are first and foremost known for Perfect Strangers, which was a show that didn't have a lot of layers to it in terms of writing or perhaps character development, but you brought this soul to this character of Balki and made him this very sort of childlike guy, endearing, certainly. You may not have planned it, but this guy was so endearing. And then you infused all of this physical comedy. When you have a role, particularly a long-running role like that, and I know the mid-'80s, early 90s were sort of a crazy up-and-down time for you, how do you find fulfillment in a role that maybe isn't always fulfilling when you have done these great things on stage and in film with these rich layers of writing? Was that a challenge for you to infuse that show, that experience, that character with meaning?
You actually answered the question. You actually answered it, and I'm going to point out to you how.
Yeah.
You answered the question in the question, and that is that I made it resonant for myself by finding, first of all, the physical comedy was never on the page, never ever was that on the page, and I naturally gravitated toward that because that was a way to give a dimension, another dimension. The text would sometimes be, I don't know, Balki and Larry, they get up and they get stranded on the roof. And I thought, okay, well, that's a situation. It's not really a story. But I found ways to give color to it. And then people responded to that. And then there was this magical secret between me and the audience, which was, well, we know and you know that there's something going on underneath. And we all had this great secret. And that was extremely rewarding. That was incredibly rewarding. And the most valuable, God, I'll never forget it, but it happened a few times. People would say to me, both during the show and long afterward, when I was a little kid, my parents were going through a divorce, and the only time I ever smiled was when I was watching that show. And I knew why. I knew why because I had taken all the dark things that happened to me and secreted them in there, and I knew people saw or felt that, and I always was astounded, but they knew that I was reaching, and so many people would say, or I was in the hospital, or I had nothing to smile at, my parents were divorced, whatever, and then that would be the one thing, and I knew that was why, and that was incredibly fulfilling, so I never got tired of that.
Cool.
And it was our secret, it was my secret between me and the audience, and I remember one of the writers, who later became a good friend, but at the time he was an adversary, and he said, well, we had a great line for your entrance, but excuse me, the audience was so busy applauding they couldn't even hear it. And I said to him at the time, you should thank your lucky stars they feel so deeply that they do that just because I walk on. It's not me they're
you're doing it for. It's the connection. And, you know, it was so harsh. And later we became close years afterwards, and he said, gee, I said, it's no problem because I never look back. But that was unique. And I had once, since then, I've achieved that in a subsequent character in Play. I played a part in a musical comedy of a servant who was doing some loyal things for the young fellow he worked for that were going to get him tortured to death. And there was a selfless quality to it. And I remember the reaction, and I remember saying to the producer, he said, I've never seen a reaction like that. I said, yeah, I have only once before, and that was on Perfect Strangers. And the reason is that there's something about selflessness that is, it's rare. You don't find it you don't find it a lot. So when an audience sees that, they react on a different level. It's also the theme of, but it's funny because it was a hit, the same time Perfect Strangers was, but it was the theme of Les Miserables. And I remember saying, God, I've just seen a musical, and the theme of it is selflessness. Can you imagine? It's not, the theme is not romance. The theme is not what happens in a circus. The theme is not, you know, some guy with a mask on his face dangling from a chandelier. The theme is selflessness, and people love it. It's the biggest thing, and, you know, it's incredibly rare, but nobody ever misses it.
This is true. And, you know, I love the show. I saw a couple of tapings, and the audience did connect with that character. You know, you've talked at times about your childhood and the darkness that you went through there and the hardship. How did those struggles in your youth inspire you to pursue both academia and arts? And how have your creative outlets, such as perhaps Balki, helped you sort of recreate your life as an adult? Have you gotten to get some of those childhood issues sort of played out through your roles?
It's funny you should say that because I remember I was sitting with a shrink a few years ago, not that long ago, and he said, you're way overdue to be getting out some of this stuff. Because my father abandoned me when I was 2 years old in New York, and I wandered the streets for hours. And it was more traumatic. It was more traumatic than I even realized, because right up until I was in my early 40s, if somebody was supposed to meet me somewhere and they didn't meet me, I would go berserk. Or I couldn't stand to be in public and they wouldn't come through. They wouldn't meet me there. And then it turned into stage fright, turned into horrible stage fright. So I went to a therapist who dealt with all these issues, and he said, let's talk about all the times you've ever been abandoned. And I told him about that one, and he said, how do you react when people don't meet you, when they say they're going to, and you're just sort of wandering around, you know, at whatever meeting point and they're not there? I said, well, I'm devastated. He said, do you sort of feel like maybe like a 2-year-old? I said, yeah, I do. He said, what do you do? I said, I usually stop being friends with them. And he said, okay, well, do you feel that you've dealt with this in your acting? I said, oh, yes, I feel a terrific connection with the audience. He said, I hate to break it to you, but if using it for acting only helps you while you're acting, it doesn't actually solve it. So I want, you know, I want to help you find a way to be angry as a 40-year-old, not as a 2-year-old. And he said, you can use it all you want in your work, but it doesn't really have lasting power. I mean, you can use it while you're performing, but then you're just going to be sad afterwards when you're all by yourself. So you need to stop feeling like you're 2 when somebody stands you up, and you can be cranky for 10 minutes as a 40-year-old, but you don't need to melt down like a 2-year-old. It was massively revelatory.
Wow.
And he was right. And then after that, he said, all you actors think that you're working through stuff, but you're not. You're only working through it for the duration of the performance, which was quite a revelation.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was a point in my life where somebody, you know, I felt abandoned me or didn't come through, then I wouldn't even want to be friends with them. And now I say, listen, next time we're supposed to meet for the movies, you just come pick me up at my house or whatever. It's not just a big, massive deal anymore.
Yeah.
But that's a fallacy that I think a lot of poor actors, there's this thing, you know, you're taught in acting school, oh, use it. You know, it's like you can use it, but you can only use it for the 2 hours you're doing it, and then you're still stuck with the problem. So the thing is, and it's fascinating, you know, you fall for all these cliches, but they, you know, he said, no, it's fresh as the day it happened. I can tell you that right now looking at your face, and you need to address it like you would address diabetes, you know, you actually have to get at it. So that was quite interesting.
Wow.
And the other thing is, when I was younger, I thought that having an abusive father and no money was, you know, the worst thing that could ever happen, but it's not even remotely. It doesn't even register on the scale of what happened to people that were holding children and, you know, those awful things in Asia where the tsunamis yanked their children out of their arms. I mean, It's nothing. It's nothing on the global scale. It's just that everybody's childhood feels incredibly painful because childhood is, you're so vulnerable. But the older I get, I think, oh, that isn't anything. It's nothing. I mean, there are people that were raped by their parents, and all I had was somebody who chased my mother around the table, trying to strangle her with the phone cord. I mean, that was bad, but he didn't actually get her.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't get her. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, in the grand scheme of things, watching your family washed away in a tsunami is probably, that's a 10, and I didn't even have a 0.1.
Yeah.
But it felt like it did, and everybody feels like theirs is.
At the time. We got to maybe experience a little bit of your therapy, it seemed, when you did an appearance on Celebrity Nightmares Decoded. We have a dream segment here on our show, and by the way, I have to say our dream interpreter, a real nice lady named Yvonne Reba, wanted me to let you know she's a big fan and say hello.
Oh, bless her.
You had a fascinating and really sort of at times disturbing house dream tied to your childhood and your mom. And how did that experience help you? And was it bizarre sharing that on TV?
I know it wasn't in the least bit bizarre. And the revelation was, it can't go into it and do it justice. I can't go into it and do it justice. But what I can go into is that I had always been ashamed of the dream because in the dream there was a house and we were in this house and then my mother got thrown by some kind of unseen spirit right through the door of the house and landed immobile in the street. And I always had great shame over having had this dream. And I never told anybody when I was little that I had the dream because I thought, because we all are unfortunately exposed to enough Freudian dream analysis to think we know what's going on. And I always thought it meant that I wished some harm to my mother, and I was always deeply ashamed of it. And the woman that was interpreting the dream said, without asking me what my interpretation was, she said, first of all, I have to tell you, I can always tell when someone is cleaning up their dreams, and that is a pure dream. You haven't changed anything. I said, you're absolutely right, I haven't. And she said, I can tell. Secondly, anytime you dream about a house, the house is you.
Yes.
And what that dream really was is you, even at that young age. I started having it when I was 5. You were getting a sense of who you are as a human being, which is quite early, but it doesn't surprise me because you obviously were precocious. And so the house, which is yourself or your sense of yourself, was expelling your mother because she was in the house and the house was just you and you had to be your. And I said, that's what it meant. And it made me feel so much better. And then I told my mother, and I said, do you remember that dream I used to have as a kid? And she said, no. I said, I had that nightmare all the time. She said, you never told me. And I said, I'm not surprised because up until now, I was 51. I said, up until now, I thought it was a shameful, terrible thing to have dreamt that you were thrown out of his house. But it's been explained to me that it was just the dawning of my own. And she said, oh, sweetie.
I could have told you that.
It was interesting, and I had a half a century's worth of angst and guilt thinking that I had this awful dream, but it was that she said, no, that's just the dream of an emerging person who just happens to be 5 years old, and that's a dream you would usually have at 15, but, you had it earlier. And it was terrifically freeing. It just goes to show you shouldn't, but it makes sense. I mean, the dreams don't. I really believed it. That's the other thing that was great about it. It was all instinctual. She was telling me, I can tell instinctually that you have not edited your dream. You haven't highlighted certain aspects to make it seem more interesting or more appealing, and you haven't taken anything out to make yourself seem more appealing. So I can tell you, I know I'm dealing with a fresh, real thing, and that she was 100% right. I didn't omit anything. And then when she told me her interpretation, I felt instinctually that it was right. I don't understand the science of dream interpretation, but I deeply felt that it made sense. And I can even feel, talking to you now, I felt this, incredible weight lift out of my heart because I was a terrible person for having dreamt that my mother got thrown through a door. And so that was, it was great. So, and I got some money for it, and I think I went and bought some salvage that very day, and it was all.
That's great. I had a couple more questions if you had a little bit more time.
Okay, go right ahead. I'm just going to run it back. So don't get scared if you hear water.
Okay.
Water?
I heard the water, yes.
Hold on a second. Andrew, how are you making out in there? Is it great? My director, producer, boss, friend is doing beauty shots of a room we did, and he seems to be getting along famously.
Oh, terrific.
Okay.
Terrific.
Yeah, that's what it's like. We have cameras in the house, but we don't care.
Well,
it's fun.
Did you have any concerns? Obviously, this is a very different type of show than the Surreal Life. But after that experience a few years ago, were there any concerns about doing a reality show in your home?
Hold on 1 second. I'll tell you in 1 second. I have just realized that... I'll tell you something in a second, if you promise not to laugh.
Okay.
I just found an unflushed toilet because I've been doing radio phoners all day, and of course I couldn't flush it earlier, and I just decided it had to be flushed. But that all I think it informed it because I had all kinds of expectations when I went on that other show, which I can't even bear to name. I thought it really would be real, and it was so manipulated that it was ridiculous. But it actually, I think the proof of the pudding is that this show, it was just out of the question that any manipulation would ever happen. So the only thing that we do here is occasionally, if I'm explaining some art historical thing and I flub it, or I'd like to be more specific, or we'd like to get it in a shorter time or something like that, we'll do another take. Other than that, it's just out of the question that anything will be staged or in any way. It's just This show is the beneficiary of that one, and that happens all the time. That happens all the time in life. You do a play when you're younger, and there's a part that you really feel strongly about, and somebody says, "Let's change it," and you do it to be a good sport, and it sucks. And then later on you say, no, I'm going to do the one I believe in, and then it's massively successful. And so, I went along with things I deeply, deeply, deeply did not believe in on that. And this is pure. It's as pure as a crystal. I mean, what you see is, unfortunately, I'm sorry that they took a beautiful word like reality and gave it this bad name, but nothing is real on those shows. It is grotesquely skewed. And so now, unfortunately, we have to use this weaker word, unscripted, to talk about a show that has any dignity at all. But, no, they're not real, any of those shows. They're all manipulated and aimed at the, people that want to see. I don't care about any of that. And I go about my business, and none of these houses, are ever offered for sale. I do them for myself, and that's part of the purity of it. I just did an interview with somebody who had a financial angle, and he said, well, what do you think they're worth now? I said, I don't know, and I don't care to know. It has no interest in me. I do them for myself. And he said, what's your look? I said, there isn't one. I let the houses tell me what they want to be, just like a good parent. Let the styles mature. Each one is what it wants to be. I'm blessed to be able to do that, because if it was, I wouldn't do such a show. But if it really was my skill to take a house and fix it and sell it, then I have no idea what I would do, because that's not what I do. But I take the houses and I do something more like what Henry Higgins did in My Fair Lady. I just let them flower, and then I enjoy them, and I let my friends stay in them, and that's the end of it. So there's no agenda, and that makes it, they're very emotional rooms. They make people feel good, and everybody, everybody who comes in likes them and feels happy in them, and that's the point. So it's a world away from that. It's far away from...
Far more authentic.
There's no comparison. It's not like it's far more authentic. It's a rare wine compared to Mountain Dew.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. People have seen you. They'll see you now as the de-invented Bronson. They've seen you in such a vast variety of roles, from innocent, accented, funny characters to dark, layered characters. And I have to say, you hilariously wrote in your playbill bio for your play Sly Fox in 2004, this quote cracks me up. His performance as a child murderer in Stephen King's Langoliers has its own rotunda in the Smithsonian's new wing for comic actors with something to prove. You wrote that?
I forgot that I wrote that.
That's great.
Oh my. That's really quite good.
That's very good. That's very good. So you forgot writing that.
What's that?
So you forgot writing that. It's been a few years.
I completely forgot that. But I read another thing that I said once. that I really liked. It was something that I said when I was very, very young. They said, "What's your philosophy of life?" I never, ever remembered saying this, but then when I saw the quote, I thought, yeah, that's exactly me. I said, I live my life as if I'm a dollar bill that the bill-changing machine is rejecting. I just keep smoothing out the damage and trying again.
That's great.
I was 25 when I was 25 when I said that, but I know I must have said it because it has my ring to it, and I think I'm a little bit amazed that I said something that was like that at 25 because I didn't know what damage was. I didn't know what rejection was. I guess I had an inkling.
Well, you need to do a book, Bronson's book of wit and wisdom, or something, audio books. You've read 30-some audio books. What's that process like? Books are a big thing for you.
Oh, it's delightful. It's delightful. One doesn't read them, one lives them. If you read them, then it's boring. You get in a booth, and you have the book, and you become the book. I was trying to think at the beginning how to do it. I mean, they call the person that does it a narrator, but narrating is standing outside of the situation. A narrator is saying, then he did this and you do this. When you read a book on an audiobook, that means a person in their commute or on a long road trip or sick in bed is listening, and you are the book. And one of my favorite things to read in a review is where they say, this is one of the best books I've ever read. They haven't read it, they've listened to it, but they feel that they've read it because you become every character and the narrator and the theme and the tone and the message and the everything. And I don't always get it right, but when I do, it's extraordinary because I suddenly wake up and I'm in this little booth and I've been far away in the Vietnam War or in the mind of a traumatized little boy who has stopped speaking ever since his mother committed suicide or something. And the thing that I always find really interesting is all of the books that aren't funny do incredibly well. They're awarded everything and they get great reviews and they get immense awards. And the funny ones, people say, But there's something about locking me in a little room with a microphone and giving me something really heartrending that brings out the best. And I love that because I don't even want to do it. They give me a few funny books at the beginning, but they're not received the same way as the ones that are really painful. And it's not like I do, I know I don't do them like a TV movie of the week. I don't rail and scream, but there's something about the quietly sort of living it that works.
Wow.
For the listener, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Kind of fun.
So it's really a performance for you,
It's
that
kind
job.
That's an interesting word. Audiobook fanciers don't like when you perform it too much. It's just being it. It's really, really a fine line. There's a character I did in a book. He lived on a park bench, and I thought he would certainly have a stuffy nose. And I did give him a stuffy nose, and everybody went crazy and said, how dare he? And the next book, all they did was just kind of think what the character would be thinking and say the words, and oh my God, you would think it was the second coming of Christ, the way that people responded to it, and oh my God. And I thought, okay, no, you don't really perform it, you just become it. It's different.
It's very interesting. Speaking of books and films and other worlds, I understand that you have long been a fan of The Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
First, is it true that you organized a convention in the 70s, like a fan convention called the Winky?
The International Wizard of Oz Club separates the United States into the same sectors as the Land of Oz, as the Winkies, the Quadlings, the Munchkins, Quadlings, and...
Oh, my.
Oh, dear God, have I possibly forgotten? Dear God, I can't bear it. Winky, Munchkins, Quadlings, and Gillikins. I can't believe I forgot that. And so the West Coast is the Winky territory. And they always have a convention, and then somebody is elected or asked to be the host and the coordinator and to organize, who speaks on what topic and all that. So when I was graduating high school, I was the host of a West Coast convention, which by default was the Winky convention, and I did that. That was the year that I graduated high school and went off to Yale. So yes, I was the, what they call it, whether it's the coordinator or it's basically you're the person that kind of calls the shots and designs the program and asks people to come and talk on various topics. It's all very fun then, because I had at that point been to, I think I'd been going since I went to my first one, I was 13, and then I hosted or chaired one. Maybe it was chairman, but I chaired one when I was 17, and it was a lot of fun.
And what was it at that age in particular about that movie, that story, that spoke to you?
Well, the Wizard of Oz Club is actually focused really on the books.
And of course, they love and respect the movie. But I had actually been this massive, and still am a massive fan of the books and of L. Frank Baum, who was the first of the 4 or 5 authors that wrote. And in those days, in the 70s, it was still a kind of a scholarly thing. I mean, there were people that, would get up and talk about, what made it a first edition first date as opposed to a first edition second date and all that stuff. And we were all book collectors. And, naturally we loved the movie because you can't not love the movie. But especially in those days, it was almost like a different thing. It was almost like I love fine cuisine and I love my Aunt June's cheesecake. I mean, the Wizard of Oz movie in those days was this ritual, and in a funny way, it was like separate but wonderful, but it wasn't like, it didn't overshadow the books for us. It was just that wonderful movie that we loved, but it was separate from the books because it's its own wonderful world. The older I get, the clearer it is to me that I actually did quite a lot of research because there are little touches in the movie that are slight but clear references to things that Baum wrote much later.
Cool.
And I think, wow, somebody really did the research. But, at the time, it was just sort of, that's the movie, and then there's Baum and his books. And I don't know what it's like now because I have been in touch with my friends from those days, but I haven't been back to the convention since 78, so I don't know what they're like anymore. I have a feeling our idea of what was rare then would have been a signed first edition of The Wizard of Oz, and now it may very well be the 1978 Ego dolls with the original box. I don't know. But
right. Well, you did, this is a bizarre segue, but you did a character named Migo, didn't you? In a sitcom.
I did.
I remember that.
Yes. Fascinating. Yes. Seriously, Migo.
After Perfect Strangers, we saw you for like a year with Suzanne Somers on Step by Step, and then Amigo and Trouble with Larry, and more recently, certainly, Young and the Restless, and the great character guest shots you've done on everything from SVU to Hawaii Five-0. Do you have favorite TV roles there that stand out in your mind?
I'll tell you what's the salient of all, and that is the fact that my director drove up from New York specifically to get a shot with me before the sun goes down and it's getting dark. So here's what we must do. I'm in the bathtub now, and you need to know that this is no longer an interview, it's an inter-nude. All right, I just want you to know, and I want everyone to be clear, I'm completely and totally giving you an inter-nude. I have to sign up, but you can ask one more question of any dimension you like. But if I don't get downstairs, my director's going to get very sad because he drove 3 hours and even brought bagels.
Oh, perfect.
And we've got to get this stuff before the sun goes down.
Well, you've been very generous. Maybe I should end with a Perfect Strangers question because there's such heart and connection still with that character you did and that show. First, I understand you do keep in touch with your co-stars, Mark Lynn-Baker and Melanie Wilson. Given the perspective that you now have versus the late 80s, early 90s, how has your appreciation for the Perfect Strangers experience, the Balki phenomena, how has that evolved through the years? Is it something that you embrace differently now?
No, it's always been the same. It was always deeply personal, and it was always very secret because other people went through growing stages with the show. There was like, we love it. Oh, that's so 80s. Oh, that's what I liked when I was little. Oh, I'm kind of nostalgic for it. Oh, I just saw an episode. I can't believe all the stuff that's in there. They went through their stages. I've always known the same thing from while we were doing it, and I used to say to Mark, before I had my back operation, I often used to go out, and when we took our opening bow, I would actually piggyback him on my back and run out with him, and then we'd run away again. And they used to say to him when they would go wild, I'd say, let's never forget this, because it may never be like this, not quite like this again. Maybe people would be screaming as if they were going to see the Beatles, and it was just this little magical chemistry that we had, and between us and the chemistry we had with the audience. And I used to say, let's not forget to savor this. I always knew, and it was always, the only thing I've had to do is very patiently weather the tides of fashion where people would say, oh, it's so nice to see you do something dignified when that was such fluffy crap.
Yeah.
And then you very adultly say, why, thank you so much, and you try to hear the compliment in it. But I always knew exactly what it was. And I would probably never be entirely willing or find it necessary to put into words what it was and is, because it was just my little secret that I always knew. And then there was just this other reality of people saying, oh, aren't you eager to move on to other things and be a real actor? Somebody asked me once in Turkey. The show was incredibly popular in Turkey.
Wow.
And this guy was giving me a haircut once, and he said, we love Balki, but when are you going to do some real acting like Jean-Claude Van Damme?
Oh, my gosh.
And I will close by telling you one of my favorite things to tell when I describe the effect that character had on people, and that is, I was in an airport about 10 years ago, maybe slightly more, not too much more, 10 years ago, and somebody got off a plane, and there was some buzz and interest and buzz, and the man next to me elbowed me in the ribs and said, Balki, look, it's Gregory Hines.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And so he was an actor that you could look at and go, ooh, but Balki was a person. And he was telling Balki how exciting it was to see Gregory Hines.
That is telling. That is interesting.
I thought, and he should have like vaguely put his arm around me. He was just a big galoot, and he just should have was like showing his little friend Balki that a big movie star got off a plane.
That is hilarious.
I know. It was sort of profound. I mean, it was a great compliment.
Yes.
It was like, oh, how exciting! A real actor, really?
Well, you did something on that show in particular that really resonated with the audience, and I know people are going to be thrilled to see you on your new show, and I really thank you for being so naked during this interview.
Nude.
Nude.
Your first internude.
It's my first internet. Well, we appreciate it very much, Bronson.
Okay, lucky for you, this is nothing Skyped.
Right.
Anyway, thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon, all right? Anytime.
Thank you so much, Bronson. We appreciate that. Take care.
Bye, kiddo. Bye now.
So from Balki Bartokomous' very first internude in Bronson Pinchot's very own bathroom in his very own house, to our Dreamweaver segment with our resident dream interpreter Yvonne Reba, who shares with us some of her own dreams about houses and rooms in the house and how that applied to inspiring her in her life. Then stay tuned while Yvonne reads one of my dreams, even more bizarre, about Joyce DeWitt, Suzanne Somers, a raging bull in my front porch in Oklahoma. What does it all mean? Thank God we have Yvonne. For more info, check out her website, YvonneReba.com. That's YvonneRyba.com. Hi, Yvonne. How are you doing?
Hello, Chris. I'm doing very well, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, we are excited to hear what you have next for us on this continuing journey. So what kind of theme do you want to tackle this week?
Well, you told me you had Bronson Pinchot coming on to the show, and I thought we'd do something about houses.
Perfect.
Or building. He's doing a wonderful new show, isn't he? About redecorating, restoring.
Restoring houses, and yes, it's on DIY Network, the Bronson Pinchot Project, but very much so. So that would be fascinating.
Yeah, so I thought, why don't we go into houses and places that we live in or whatever? Let's see what I have. And first of all, before I could give you a dream, I'll have to explain what houses mean in dreams. As I think I may have mentioned to you another time that the house represents yourself. But there are some books out there where you've got to be careful. I looked at one that was just absolutely off the mark and said it meant that you were going to have a very quiet, easy life if you dreamt about a house. And I thought, that's not exactly what it means at all.
You won't be homeless. Yeah.
Yes.
Goodness.
Well, the house is yourself. It's a little bit like the tortoise, or the turtle. You carry it with you, as it were. In the dream, all the parts of the house represent parts of you. So that if you dream you're in the kitchen and you're cooking, then you need to look at that aspect of yourself. Now, maybe that it's about cooking, about providing for your family, about the way that you're eating at the moment. It depends on what's going on in your life. And you have to figure it out. But it can also be a play on words. that you might be cooking something up. That could be anything. It could be a surprise party for somebody, or you're working on getting a new job and you're thinking about how to approach that. A lot depends upon the person themselves. So every part of the house represents a different aspect of your life. So that if you dream about the bedroom, the bedroom represents, of course, sex. It also represents rest. What's going on in the bedroom in the dream tells you what area of your life that's about.
And what if you're cooking up something in the bedroom?
Yeah, that's right. If you're in the bedroom with the kitchen partly in there as well, then you have to, figure that one out.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that a lot of the times, and sex in dreams, which is something we'll talk about another time, so I want to focus on the house for now. But sex is not always about sex. It's about connecting and joining together with things. So that the person that you're having sex with may not be a person. It might be that that person represents something in your life. That's why a lot of people get horrible shocks when they wake up. They think they've got some kind of deviant thing going on inside of them. When they find they've been sleeping with some close relative or somebody they like very much, really. Could be that. But it's all about what's going on in your life at the moment. Look at that and then see where you are in the house and how that would apply to that problem. So that's really it. Now, the attic in a dream, being right at the top of the house, obviously is where our heads are, okay, because like our bodies as well. We're having to look at what's up there. Now, what do you keep in an attic? Well, memories. A lot of stuff that has come from the past gets stored away in the attic. And a lot of the time, and I've had some really weird dreams about attics, parts of it will start to show up, and when I wake, I realize it's revolving around an issue from the past that is something like what is going on in my life at the moment, and I need to look at it. I need to say, well, how did I work on this before? Or I didn't do very well on it before. I need to make sure that I know how to resolve it now.
Right. Fascinating.
And I'll talk a bit more about this next time as well, because there's a lot to put in there, and the house has many aspects to it.
Well, next week we will have Little House on the Prairie star Alison Angrim, so we'll have a little house or two in our dream segment too.
Okay, that's good.
Perfect. Well, you got a lot of rooms to cover, so this will be multiple shows.
Absolutely. No end to it.
Absolutely. Well, you know, Bronson's show is creativity and restoring houses. Do you have anything sort of along that line, or the house symbolizing new change in your life?
When you told me that you had Bronson coming on, and I told you how I think he was absolutely hilarious in the movies he's done and so on, and he's a really talented person.
Yes.
I thought of a dream about a house. I think I dreamt it when we lived in Utah. And I enjoyed living in Utah. And we were there for about 4.5 years in the mid-90s. And I enjoyed it, but my husband didn't enjoy it so much. He had to work with the people. I mean, I just made friends and did my thing. But he was out there working, and he also liked a beer with his food when he went to a restaurant. And at that time, you couldn't get a beer in the place. And there were only in certain areas. You had to go to kind of like the shop that the state ran where you could buy alcohol. And they just sold wine and beer. They didn't sell whiskey or anything like that at that time. Now, this probably has changed. I know it's much more open now. But when we were there, it was, I'd say the mid-90s. It was 91 to about 95.
Okay. And
I had this dream. We were coming up to the end of our stay there because we tended to move when a new big job arrived in the artistic field, you know. And I had this dream. I dreamt that we were looking for a house to buy, and the real estate, the realtor showing us around this place, and it had a very simple look to it. It had a kind of an adobe outside, and there was a lot of that kind of thing in the southern part of Utah. And very pretty, kind of Santa Fe style thing. And then inside it was kind of Californian, open, but one room leading into another around an atrium or an open garden area that the house surrounded. And I was thinking, oh, this is pretty, but it was a little bit plain. White walls, nothing much going on there. But it was pretty the way it was laid out. And then I walked into a room, and the other people, and you know, my husband, the realtor, and other people were in another place. And I looked at the wall and thought, well, we could hang nice paintings up here. We could make this look good. When suddenly the whole wall sort of either moved away or just disappeared. And in its place was this very thick glass. and behind it, water in which fish were swimming. At first I thought it was a tank of fish, like a big aquarium. Then I realized that it wasn't, that it was a view into the ocean. And everything in there was beautiful. I mean, there was nothing ugly or scary. Everything was absolutely gorgeous. Lovely colors. The fish were swimming around in that hypnotic way they have.
Right.
And I was absolutely dumbstruck by this, you know. And I thought, how can we be looking at the ocean in a desert place? And nothing here, you know? I like time warp.
Right. Worlds colliding.
Yeah, it was much like that Dr. No movie where James Bond is, you know, shown into Dr. No's place and there's this huge wall with sharks and things behind it swimming around. And he can see the ocean. And that's how it looked, but it wasn't, there were no sharks. It was all beautiful, colorful fish and it was very pretty. So I thought, gosh, this house has got some hidden stuff in it that I didn't know about. So I moved into another room and there, from the floor rising up suddenly out of nowhere was this fountain. Which, another weird thing, I mean, in the middle of the house, there's this fountain, beautiful fountain, not a huge, nasty thing. I mean, it wasn't squirting water all over the place. It was very controlled in that way. But it had a lovely feel to it. It sounded good. And I was like, oh, my goodness, how neat, you know. Kids will love this when they see it.
Yeah.
When they're hearing it, they can have the fountain in the middle. Wow, this is going to be wonderful. And then, and this is something that sounded so weird when I actually saw it in the dream, there was a wall that was completely covered in grass. Now, it was real grass growing on the wall. And I remember feeling it and thinking, wow, this is weird. I wonder who thought this up. Now, many years later, I was in Santa Fe visiting a friend, and we'd been to the theater, and we went afterwards, a group of us, to this very nice, rather modern kind of club. And we just had drinks outside on this balcony area, and I wanted to go to the ladies' room. And when I got in there, believe me, there was a wall covered in real grass.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. And I remember looking and thinking, is that real? And it was real.
I dreamed of that.
I know. I dreamt of it, though, many years before, and I thought, well, I asked somebody, and apparently they put it on in rolls, and they have some way of, somebody comes around and looks after it and clips it a bit and so on. I'm sure they have to take it off every year and put another lot on, but it was just like, blew my mind, right, that I'd seen this thing.
Did it smell like fertilizer?
No, it's just like we were on a lawn, only it was on a wall.
Perfect.
Coming out at you, and I was going up, I thinking, wow, I wonder who thought this up. But it was a real topic, you know, to talk about.
Right.
So that was that dream, and when I woke up, I thought, wow, this is an expansion of the living that we're doing now in many different ways. I mean, this is sort of way out stuff here. This is not going to be your average, everyday kind of a life. There's something coming. You know, my subconscious, whatever you want to call it, I think my higher self was saying, be prepared. The white walls are going to disappear. I saw a lot of new stuff showing up here.
Wow.
You know what? It really did. It did show up, and it showed up in the most amazing way, especially for my husband, who was feeling some of the restriction of living in a place where Mormon culture was very strong. We were asked to go and do a job in a 30,000 square foot home in Overland Park, which is in Kansas City. A very wealthy person, of course, who owned hotels and banks and all sorts of things. Wow. And he had a house he was building, and he wanted some beautiful stuff put in this house. And he would not accept the painting contractor, who happened to be a friend of my husband's. He wouldn't accept him to do the painting unless he had somebody who could do this fancy work. And the fancy work, one of the first things was he wanted a dome that was in the foyer of his home, and it was a very high thing. I was pretty sure it was up there. And the dome itself is about 30 feet across, which was a biggish dome, all right. And he wanted it done with gold leaf, mind you, gold and silver or whatever. And he wanted to see the designs, the ideas, and he wanted somebody who could do it. Now, putting gold leaf on is not an easy thing.
No.
It's a very tricky thing. You have to know what you're doing, and my husband did. I mean, he'd been trained in England, and he'd done many, many things in gold leaf, but he'd never done a big dome before.
Yeah.
I mean, that is prohibitive.
Yeah, I can't even, do that on a piece of paper, let alone on a dome.
It's just staggering, and you have to know, when you put the glue on, it's called size, it has to be at the right tack before you can put the gold leaf on, and that's the right tack means it can't be too wet, and it can't be too dry, it won't stick, and you can't have fingerprints all over it because it won't shine.
Right.
You have to know what,
Absolutely.
Really so he came up with a design for this dome, and he did it in two colors of gold, with lemon gold, and then the kind of gold we usually see, which is kind of a buttery gold. And then he did platinum leaf instead of silver, which could tarnish. And then he came up with some kind of like design in which these lozenge shapes were slightly raised by the use of what we call mud, that they use it to put walls in and so on. It's something that's like you stick things together with it. He was doing it with that, so it raised up a little bit, so the gold was at different levels from the ceiling. That's a teeny little bit, might be only a couple of millimeters, but it would catch the light more. And they had this fabulous chandelier they got from like Czechoslovakia to go in there. I mean, it was going to be a wonderful thing. You'd enter the house, and there you'd be hit by this fabulous gold and platinum dome with this beautiful chandelier sparkling. So that took several months, of course, because first you had to get the preparation done, which is more important than anything when you're putting gold leaf and stuff on, because any little bump underneath shows up. So that had to be all done. That took quite a while. And so it was a great thing. That was a wonderful thing, because one of the last things he did in that part of his life in a house. After that, he decided he was going to retire from that and just paint on canvas and board and stuff, do his paintings that way. Nice. He was older, and he needed not to be climbing up ladders 20 foot up and working on scaffolding,
right,
and so on. And that was the dream. The dream said life is going to be really explosive with your imagination. And we did. We had next year and a half that we were there. We had a totally different life from the one that we'd had for the 4.5 years before. Both were very nice. But my husband enjoyed the last one the most.
It's definitely more colorful, more lively, kind of like the grass growing there, maybe representing life or growth.
Well, Kansas City has wonderful museums and lots of great art galleries, and it had all sorts of things that appealed to us. Their restaurants were wonderful, of course, and they served wine with it. So this was what he wanted. He wanted to enjoy life while he worked hard.
Nice.
And I'm glad he had that chance to do that.
Absolutely. Well, very cool. So did you share with him at some point? You wouldn't believe this dream I had. It seems to have been predicting where we're going or where we are now.
Well, at first he ignored my dreams when we first got married, but after about 30 years, I think he'd started to pay attention. And he told me that his dreams. So he had some really interesting dreams, and one of them, which I'll tell you another time, told him that he had to leave and go to the next place, and that was Kansas City, or Overland Park, really, that this thing was coming up, and he needed that dream to help him go because he wasn't sure he was wanting to do it. It's a huge step, to move completely from one state to another, and we did it several times in our lives together here.
Well, so eventually he realized, as you have, I'm sure, had told him, that dreams can be helpful, instructive, a little bit predictive, and he started to tune into that?
Yes, it did. In fact, I came across a book. I was cleaning out my closet and trying to get stuff straightened out. It's a walk-in thing, and I'm using it for office supplies and so on. Came across a lot of old diaries and things in which he had started to record his dreams. And I had written in what I thought they meant, and I had forgotten I'd done that. So yes, he did. He got very much into his dreams, very much.
Yeah, fantastic. And you had another house-related dream for us?
Yes, I've got quite a lot of house-related dreams. Oh, I'm going to figure out which one I'm going to tell you. Let me see. Yes. Oh, yes, this one's called The Police House. This is what I said. Now, this one was in this time frame when we lived in Utah. It was 94. And I wrote Police House on top, and this is what I had written underneath. We, and by we I mean there was a family feeling here. It wasn't just my husband and I, but we, with a group, had bought or rented a house which was 2 stories in a flat green area. We were arranging things, because you do when you've got your new house, when the police arrived. And they were very friendly, and they showed us around the place like they knew all about it. And then I noticed that the police had started building more rooms on the side of this house, and then they moved the police station in. And I thought, well, I was a bit taken aback by the fact that they decided to move their police station to the side of our house.
Come and knock on our door.
Yes. Oh, we'll be safe enough when we're living above the police station, because I was thinking, well, we can't be living, if they've got all this space downstairs. They were taking over the house, really.
That's crazy.
Well, that was the first part, and I thought, well, we're going to be a bit cramped. I went out. The next part of the dream, I'm in a large store, and I'd gone for some pills. Okay, so it was like a large CVS or a Walgreens or something like that, but it was huge. It was a very bright drugstore, out of keeping with the small country feel of the place that we'd moved into. And I thought, well, they must need a lot of pills. Remember that phrase, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I also thought we couldn't have the police living with us, right? I mean, I decided that when I went outside, I was thinking, they have to go.
Especially with all those pills.
Anyway, before I had gone to sleep, I'd asked for some kind of guidance about what we should do, because we'd been offered a job in South Carolina. As a matter of fact, we ended up going to Kansas to do this other thing. But at the time, we still had about less than a year, about 8 months in that place. We had work to finish there. So you see, our dreams can jump ahead a bit too here. They're giving you signals of what's coming up.
Yeah.
I know our lives we have free will, we choose what to do. But there are guideposts along the way sometimes, and I think that some of our dreams are guideposts and saying, if you go there, this is what you're going to be up against.
Interesting.
Okay? And I think you've already got one of them, haven't you? One of the little messages about the pills. Okay, you know, the praise is somebody's a pill. And here there were a lot of pills. Okay, so it said, you know, you want to be going somewhere where it's fun. You don't want to be going somewhere where it's restrictive. Having the police actually having the police station attached to your house is a bit of a bummer. Okay?
Yeah.
You know, it's not like you're planning on doing anything. It's just who wants to have their every move watched by, you know, the police downstairs.
The ultimate authorities.
That's right. The police in a dream represents authority. Now, got to look at the dream again. The police could be your own conscience guiding you and directing you and saying, you can't do that. That's going to be wrong. Or the police can be restrictive influence upon you. You know how it is when you're going down the freeway and you're driving and you know, a police car up a road or whatever, you suddenly start to go to the speed limit.
You're scared to death to go 56.
That's right. Or you might be doing the speed limit, but you still go down a bit because you just don't want to look as if you're doing anything.
Right.
So we all have that, watch out, somebody's watching me feeling. And I looked at this dream and I thought, well, there's the restrictive feeling that we've got the lot of pills thing, and we don't want to be taking lots of pills either. We don't want to be getting ourselves all worked up. It seemed to me that it was saying, here's your sign. Do not be going to South Carolina.
Wow.
Something else, even better, is coming up for you. And, of course, the something was this great job where my husband did this fabulous dome with gold leaf, and he also did various other things in the house that he was very proud of, and it was a very beautiful house, which, of course, it would be when you had experts working on it from all angles and a lot of money to pay it.
That's
this
nice.
was somebody's dream, and he had the money to have that dream happen, which was, let me put it in quotes, like my dream. How wonderful a house could be, yeah.
I love it. So you have really learned how to understand how different house dreams, rooms, things happening on the walls in the house, the attic, below, how these all refer to parts of your life.
Absolutely. Sometimes you don't get the full meaning of a dream until quite a while afterwards, because that particular dream was saying, don't go to South Carolina, something better's coming up, but I didn't know what the better was and showed up. But then I had the other dream later, the one where we had the grass walls and the fish swimming in the ocean and all that stuff. I mean, it's like you were scuba diving, you know, you were down there with it. Wonderful. I mean, imagine just sitting in your house looking at that kind of a thing. I always thought that thing in Dr. No was really incredible, so I'm sure I incorporated that from that movie, because I've seen that quite a lot of times.
You can't go wrong with Bond.
No. Oh, that was a good one.
Well, you mentioned the police and the authorities, and that reminds me, and I've been reminded recently of this dream that I had when I was like 10 or 12 in the early 1980s. I vividly recall it. I always sort of dismissed it as just nonsense, but years later, once you and I started talking, I began to think, maybe this dream was really trying to tell me something.
Yes.
With Suzanne Somers and Joyce DeWitt reuniting earlier this month on YouTube for the first time in 31 years since Suzanne's contentious exit from Three's Company after her fight with executive producers. Everyone's been thinking of that era, and this dream again popped in my head. And it's so funny, Yvonne. Again, I was like 10 or 12. And we were out in the neighborhood, like in my neighborhood, in the rural town that I lived in. And it was Joyce and Suzanne, who I was many, many years from meeting or interviewing, years before I even thought about writing a book on Three's Company, being chased by a bull through the town, through the area. It was almost like the running of the bulls in Spain, but it was just one bull and three people, Three's Company. Thank you, John Ritter, for letting me do that part. But it was a very very intense dream, and all I really remember about it, other than the chase and the adrenaline and the intensity, was we all three hid under my front porch, either to be just protected. I think that maybe we felt like we were hiding there too, and we felt sort of safe, because that's where, Three's Company stars want to hang out, is under my porch. But it was so bizarre, and you mentioned authority, and certainly bulls have that sort of, intense. Any sense of that, or is it just something I need to go to a therapist for?
No, you're fine.
Okay.
Don't worry about that part. Did you really have a front porch like that?
I did, yes.
Okay, so it's a real front porch, and you could get underneath it.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, we can get underneath the porch of my husband's office, but this house is on a foundation that has a porch, though.
Yes.
This is what I think. What a porch represents, it's part of the house, but it's outside. So it's view. It's easy to see. It's being in the open, all right, unless you have a covered-up porch, which I doubt this was.
No.
So I'm thinking here this is something that's kind of out in the open, and if it was precognitive, and that means, as you know, something that was predicting what was going to happen in the future, it was absolutely true, because the bull, which is a very masculine image, no way that a bull could be thought of as a feminine thing, all right? It's a masculine, well known for chasing people, and here it was chasing these two women who, and was this about the time when they were having this contentious thing going on in Three's Company?
Yes.
History? Yes, right. So you were kind of like being told, because at some point in the future you were going to actually be involved heavily with these people. I mean, you did interviews with John a lot, and with Joyce. I don't know if you did interviews with Suzanne.
Yes, in fact, I did.
Yes, yes, okay. So you met all of them, you see. So here you have this image of the future in which both of them are being chased by, and you said they just got together again, and I saw it, by the way. Absolutely great, I loved it.
Wasn't it nice?
And I know Joyce too, and I was very happy to see this, and I thought Suzanne came over extremely well. And the two of them did so well on this, how they explained how they felt, and straight away Joyce had said, we had problems with the masculine producers, whatever it was, people up with the male side of things, and that's your bull chasing you.
That's right.
I like about that. And hiding under your porch, probably you may have done that at some point.
Probably.
I don't know if you did or not, but it's kind of like, we can be safe under here.
Yeah.
It's not in the house, it's not actually, it doesn't affect you, right? It's not internal, because although you reported it and talked about it and wrote about it, it wasn't exactly affecting you, although later in life, some years later, and I remember because we were talking, you had some problems too with that kind of thing, where people were riding roughshod over you.
And tied to Three's Company, this was the NBC movie that was done about a decade ago, and originally it was developed based upon my book, and then some things happened, and there were a couple of, again, male executive producers, just like on Three's Company, that got very possessive of the piece, and actually took it and did their own thing with it, and then it became this big struggle for me to stay involved, and it was crazy. Ultimately, there was some resolution, but I got to experience firsthand this feeling of sort of being disenfranchised, which I think is a word that sums up both Joyce and Suzanne's experiences on Three's Company at the hands of their older male executive producers. Ultimately, Joyce got a raw deal there too when they didn't spin her off with John or didn't gracefully transition with her to the new show. So this is something that at the time I had this dream, Suzanne had already gone through, and maybe Joyce was presently going through it in the early to mid-'80s. And years later, I would have a kind of similar experience with the Three's Company movie. So maybe it was precognitive on a number of levels.
Well, I think so. When you told me that dream a little while ago there, and I thought about it, and I thought, wow, that applied to you too.
It's
you
funny.
also had this run-in. Like the bulls in Pamplona, if you're not getting out of the way, you get trodden on.
That is
and you did
it.
Trodden on. You did. I mean, not beaten down, but it was okay. I mean, you came through it. And of course, Joyce and Suzanne have come through it.
Yes.
And that's good. Hiding under the porch is also probably significant. The porch being the outside world, okay? But underneath, getting away from it, hiding away. Well, look, we just got to have to ignore the whole thing. We just have to go away from it. But the ball didn't get to you there. You were in a safe place. That's an interesting dream, definitely.
And one last thing, when you said a safe place, when Joyce and Suzanne interviewed for my book in the mid to late 90s, they both broke their silence, not only about each other and about their experiences with John, but also, especially with Joyce, about her experience with the producers. And I think, especially with Joyce, she needed to feel safe in bringing some of this stuff out that she maybe had internalized to a point, but feeling safe that I would filter it and share with the public what she was comfortable with. So perhaps this sort of open but protective front porch maybe represented the public sphere, and yet also bringing a little bit of that into a private, safer, more intimate realm. I think that book was the beginning of Joyce and Suzanne communicating with each other through me, through the book, and ultimately the documentary and other things, and now years later, finally one-on-one. So perhaps there was a public-private sphere element to that too. It's pretty fascinating.
I think often in dreams, and I have found this out doing this particular program with you, I look through my books and I see the date on them. Look at that one, 1980, 1994. Okay, good job I dated these things. And I'm thinking, good grief, now I look at that dream again. I see how also it foreshadows something that came along some years later.
Yes.
And it really staggers me sometimes how apt these dreams are. So it really pays you to write them down, date them, and put down what's going on in your life or a little comment about them for later on. And when you look back, you will be surprised how your higher self is trying to guide you into this place that is safe and is the best place for you.
Good advice. And even if it's a silly dream or something that, like the one I mentioned, just seems so nonsensical, make a note because it could have a deeper aspect to it.
Well, our subconsciouses are wonderful things. Believe me, they're so imaginative and so creative. Look at me, a grass wall, before somebody else thought of it, Right. Not that I would have a grass wall in my house, but that I thought was interesting. That kind of thing, it shows you when you wake up how incredible your mind is.
Absolutely.
You think, wow, how could I have thought that up? That is so amazing.
It's the wonderful imagination, and with your help in making these notes and keeping these journals and hearing your stories, we can later reimagine what that dream meant and give it some meaning, and with a little bit of retrospect, that always helps.
Very good, Chris.
I tied it all together there.
Yes, reimagine.
Reimagine that, Yvonne. Well, as always, it's been a great joy to talk to you, and I can't wait to talk to you again next week about some more maybe house dreams connected to our Little House on the Prairie guest.
That would be wonderful. Yes, I look forward to that.
Reimagine That with Chris Mann was brought to you by Retroality TV. Copyright 2012 by Chris Mann. You can find us at retroality.tv and at reimaginethat.libsyn.com. Tweet us at retroalitytv or join us on Facebook at facebook.com/retroalitytv. And don't forget to check out our TV channel at youtube.com/retroalitytv. Now, please excuse this enthusiastic announcer as she risks going blind by doing the dance of joy alone. Die, 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 die. Hey, 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 hey. Where'd everybody go?